for the best in me. That's what I really am, and all I want to be. It may take some time, it may be hard to find, but see me beautiful.
When I suddenly realized that this also was my calling, it kind of like an elixir went down into my chest and warmed me and gave me a sense of solidity of what am I doing here on this planet.
I wanted to support people in changing their lives in a way that just supported life being more fun and joyful and connecting. And so Marshall's work was just a perfect fit for that.
The concepts grabbed me. The clarity did. It wasn't just the concepts. It was the spiritual dimension of it and the potential of it and the concepts that are teachable as tools. So that all got me hooked.
This was a change in how one viewed one's life and viewed one's interactions with others.
It's a total turnaround to compare to what we are taught and how our language is usually used.
It's incredibly powerful, very, very powerful.
It provides, you could say, a step-by-step procedure recipe of how to move from the state of judgment to the state of connection.
Therapy was a totally different story using NVC.
It is so unique. It is the highest form of connection available to human beings. It's better than sex.
I studied many other communication processes, and I realized that NVC was special in many ways. You know, some other ones had I statements and other such things, but what NVC had that others didn't was the fact that it talked about the specific observation, and it had the feelings and needs, and then it ended with a clear request. When we then go to a request that your needs matter just like mine do, now it's about you and me. It's not just getting out the I messages. It's not just speaking my truth and not really caring how it lands for you. But I do care because you're part of this equation, this dialogue, and that's really key. And I haven't seen that in other processes or other models.
And it creates this magic of connection. This is one of his main things, is that we don't have to say things. It's not about the words. It's about our heart, our energy, because what are we trying to do? We're trying to feel the other person, be in their shoes, so to speak, without jumping into them. And that all boils down to this beautiful, loving, open connection.
It has specifics of when you have this reaction in this situation, here is what you can do to transform your reaction into a way that has the highest likelihood of the other person receiving it without being defensive.
I remember in 1993, that was when in Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, there was this war, this terrible war going on. We had organized a workshop in Hungary, and there were people from Croatia and Serbia who were not on good speaking terms. The people came not with the blessing of their families, because they said, what, you're going to talk with the enemy? You could feel the tension. It was really a moment of, oh my God, what do we do now? So Marshall started as if they didn't know already. He used just nothing else but his model of nonviolent communication. And one person from Croatia started to tell how that was for her when the Serbians bombarded her city. She was in a cellar of the building, and the water started to come up, and she didn't know whether she's going to survive, because she heard upstairs how the Serbian forces were treating her family. And, all the terrible experience came through. And when she was done crying, somebody from the Serbian group said, but did you know what you did to us? And I was wondering what Marshall was going to do. And he let that happen. And then another Serbian woman started to witness what the other woman said, the Croatian woman. And at that moment, when she started saying that, a Serbian woman giving empathy to a woman who is from Bosnia, and really a Serbian woman could understand what that meant for the human being who is sitting there on the chair. We all cried. We just all cried. We cried. Like, it was so incredibly powerful that the so-called enemy had the heart to go into the heart of the other person. All of a sudden, the you and them, or the us and them, became a we. We need to be present for each other. That's the healing.
Another way that Marshall's work differs from other people's is his concept of what is violent. It touched me a lot to really try to get this, that if I use a word that stimulates reaction in you, that is violent. If I tell you that what you're saying, that I feel attacked, I'm saying you're violent with me. So this is part of what I call the details, except that they go deep. They're detail on the surface, and underneath is a very important concept, that to be more conscious of, again, our energy and our presence, and using words that will increase the possibility of being compassionate with each other and being open and being available.
Moral evaluations need to be transformed if we're going to have real connection and rich and safe lives. So that if those judgments are allowed to exist in raw form, if they're not transformed, that we're going to have violence. So to put it another way, it's protocol for transforming, not denying judgments, moral judgments about who did what and who's wrong. So it provides a procedure for moving from that world of moral judgments to a world beyond them.
Marshall alerted me to that the kinds of thinking that one is involved with judgments and with evaluations, is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. It is in our culture. It is what we are immersed in. So that that was also eye-opening for me, that how predominant, prevalent it was in all of my interactions. Gee, that's a very nice thing that you're saying to me. Oh, you're so sweet. Oh, how can you be so rude? So insensitive. That's so inappropriate. Oh, what a dear you are. And all of those that I'm just saying there are just common in all of our communication, but they are all evaluations and judgments of the other person, and are almost second nature. They are so ubiquitous. So that it alerted me to that it is those, Marshall then also said to me that, which was so important, that kind of labeling then does something to you, and that kind of labeling is at the source of violence.
He did not like labels. So anytime we're using a label, that also is violent. So if I say he's a mean person, or if he's lazy, or she is incapable of a decent thought, those are violent. That's violent energy in Marshall's, as I understand Marshall's work. What surprised me was that he was also saying, and this is tough for me, this is one I haven't completely internalized. He would also say that if I say, you're so kind, or you're so generous, these are labels. And what they do, as I understand it, they put us into a box, and a box is, again, static. So I remember very clearly the things that people said to me I was good at and how they influenced me.
If I accept that you have the power to tell me I'm clever, then you have the power to tell me I'm an idiot, too. So you could say it's preemptive self-defense might be one way of explaining why I don't accept wonderful evaluations, or at least I like to hear something behind it.
So that's why I was wanting to find a way out of that. How can I say my anger, which includes judgments? I learned that from Marshall too. I didn't realize that until I had been with Marshall. How can I say that without a judgment? One starts with the behavior of the other person, and that's the only thing that one ever says about the other person. That everything following that is about oneself. So it is do not stay with what you're thinking about the other person, although there is a possibility of doing that too. But instead, look to what happens to you when you have that thought. And instead of saying the thought, although you can say that, there is a way to do that in nonviolent communication. But you can also avoid that thought and simply say what the impact is on you. And for me, there were two things about that which were just transformative. One was, I saw how if I didn't say any judgment or thought about the other person, but said what was happening to me, how the interaction would change instantly, because I'm no longer making any claim as to the other person's character, personality, reality. I'm only talking about me. And the second thing was that when I did that, I got in touch with a different level of my experiencing than I get in touch with when I stay with what I am thinking. So that how I actually feel in relation to the other person changes. That when I am in my thoughts about them, I have literally a different bodily, I have a different experience within myself of who they are and my relationship to them. And Marshall's approach is radical. It's a radical approach. So that I think that when people came to workshops for him, that they also saw how this was a change in how one viewed one's life and viewed one's interactions with others.
It also had a consciousness part of the process. So it wasn't just a static model, but there was something that changed within yourself in doing this process. So there was a much higher component, much deeper and richer component, and a life-changing component than I see from just standard communication techniques or tools.
I believe that the structure of NVC, the 4 steps, that is very valuable, but we cannot get by with just that. I think part of becoming a good sharer or trainer, whatever we want to call it, facilitator, is to really work on ourselves, on refining our own senses, our sensibilities, our heart, and become aware when we lose it. Sometimes we lose it. To do the inner work is very, very important.
So for me, the thing that is most different about Marshall's work is that, first of all, it's an energy. It's a living, it's an alive presence that we bring, and the intent behind it that I've never seen any other program talk about. The intent behind it is that we get ourselves out of the way. We learn to deal with our, what we call jackal thinking, which is just thinking that's judging or criticizing or thinking about what we're going to have for lunch. And that we translate any thinking or give ourselves empathy about it to get to our heart.
I did learn eventually the difference between the outline or the procedures or the guidelines or the protocol or whatever you want to call it, and the intent, and how they are most useful when they are congruent with each other, and limited use if the intent is out of line or can even get you in trouble. I have a seminal experience I'll never forget when I noticed the great difference. One time, my older sister was having a dispute with my younger sister about a very hot issue about our inheritance. And I was giving her empathy, or thought I was, and telling her, so you would really have liked it if Vera had given more consideration to your needs. And she snapped back at me, don't give me that reflexive shit. She didn't even know I was, quote unquote, using the NVC protocol. I was trying to follow it. And I'm thinking, I was giving her empathy. What went wrong? But I realized my intention was not to be with her. My intention was to get her to take responsibility for her own feelings and needs. It was to educate her and also to stop her from expressing an angry voice. So my intention was not to be empathically present with her. And so I got very clear that the form is one thing and the intention is another.
The 4 steps are kind of the raft to get to this island of NVC consciousness or giraffe consciousness. And that once we're on the island, we don't need the words, like those words are not important. And so, there was something about that letting go of, because I find today that it's held more in a straitjacket. I want to get the 4 steps of the process, and that people teach the 4 steps more than they focus on the consciousness. And to me, we're missing the point.
In Chicago, we brought Marshall in for a workshop, and this guru was in town doing his own workshop. And he invited Marshall to his workshop, to the first night of the workshop. And he turned the whole thing over to Marshall because he said, "Here is the missing piece for my work." It resonated with me because I had already felt this lack from what I knew from Rogers. He had the empathy part, but not the speaking part. And what Marshall said then just resonated instantly with, aha, here's the missing piece.
NVC also differs from other programs that I'm aware of in its detail and completion. The detail, to me, offers people skills to know the difference between what they might say that would stimulate disconnection with another person and what they might say that would stimulate connection.
I noticed that a lot of people know about I statements. So I would most consistently answer, well, I statements have a formula, but I statements don't have the 4 key distinctions. And so I statements don't have the level of awareness that NVC does with the distinctions of what observations are and aren't, what feelings are and aren't, what needs are different than strategies and are shoulds and shouldn'ts, and what requests are different than demands. So without awareness, it gives us a lot more depth than just pure I statements.
For example, one of the games I play when I'm in a bookstore is I go to the self-help department and I look for books on communication. I pick one out, pick another out, and thumb through it real quickly, looking for, tell the person how that makes you feel. And pretty much every single time I'm like, yes, there it is. And Marshall would say, that gives your power away. That other person is making you feel. So that's about ownership. His work talks about ownership. It talks about how, and it gives us the tools for how to really express our honesty.
So the part about different kinds of listening, because we talk about that in NVC, the different kinds, and using sympathetic or empathetic. I also find reflective listening. People often talk about NVC and also use in other processes reflective listening, which is just an acknowledgement of really what they've heard. And sometimes it's parroting what they said rather than really connecting with the deeper needs that we're talking about in nonviolent communication.
Yeah, the closest that I know about is what was called active listening, and it was also called active parenting. And in fact, I had a book on that, but there was nothing around what we call the 3rd step, what we now call the need step in those books or in that work. And so even when he had the wishes and the wants included, that made a big difference. But there was a clarity when when we all started to work more on needs than in wishes and wants, it was like it was touching upon what we call as universal human qualities that we all could relate to.
So the feelings and needs piece, for me, what's interesting about it, and I remember Marshall clearly saying that you want to connect the feelings and needs with the speed of life. And one of the things I remember hearing is that if I were to say, are you angry? Then the person would say, yes, I'm angry. And it becomes even larger. But if I say, are you angry because you want respect? Now the person can drop down deeper and say, is that true? So to really get clear on what's that life energy? What is that about for me? One of the things I noticed today is I don't know that we all agree on what empathy is, for example. I know Brené Brown has her own take on empathy. And I know, other people, the way they describe empathy is very different than what I learned from Marshall as far as empathy, for example. So what I learned from him was that empathy is purely presence. And it doesn't matter what language someone's speaking. I can have empathic presence with them. So it's not about me knowing what they're saying or trying to understand what they're saying. I'm accompanying them on their path of their own inner knowing. And from that, they can find their own clear requests of themselves or others.
In my empathic listening, I was hired by a big telephone company who was downsizing. And I was hired they were downsizing and they were letting go mid-level managers that had been there for decades. And they asked me to come and to be an empathic voice or to be available to the people as they were escorted out. And I did that. I did that for a couple of days' time. But what was most dramatic for me was that I got a couple of calls from managers that said, who did the firing or the laying off, who said, so-and-so just exited and said they were going to go home and get a gun. Would you contact them? And there were at least 2 occasions there where I called the person. And I said, and I did straight NVC with them. I said, I'm calling you because I've been asked to call because your manager said that you, after being dismissed, that you were going home and getting a gun. And I'm very concerned about that. So I'm reaching out, I'm calling you. I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was something like that. I'm calling you to find out how you are. And on both occasions in which that happened, I just empathized with the people as they exploded. And you're damn right, I'm going to go home and get a gun. I've been with this fucking company for 35 years. What in the world do you expect? Then they lay me off. They just show me out the door. And I responded with empathy. And in both cases, anyhow, they calmed down to the point after only about 20 minutes or so where they said, I really don't have any intention of doing that. I am just so furious. I don't know what to do. What I saw with Marshall immediately was that this kind of way of changing one's relationship with others, as well as becoming aware of the kind of language which promoted or contributed to, and maybe even promoted violence that I got from Marshall, was a way of doing social change.
I would say in general that there is more openness these days. Sweden is a very democratic country. So there is a lot of care for staff in general in our culture. But when it becomes clear that this is about sharing power, and this is about sharing power, then the curtain might fall. There's kind of a limit of what you can accept in a business culture, for instance. But teachers, I would say, at least in our country, are more open to it now because it's gone so bad in some areas that they are desperate for a change. And then they are more open to see what NVC can offer.
I used to be part of a program at San Quentin State Prison in California called Alternatives to Violence Project. And they had a part of the program that was all about communication. And so I brought in what I knew about NVC at that time, and they loved it. The whole AVP program actually shifted. They used to teach iMessages, and now they do more NVC. And so I was doing this part about communication. And we, I'd shared it in the group and did interaction exercises and such with the group of about 25 inmates. And then we were all divided up into one-on-ones. And I was sharing with this one person and listening to him. And I forget exactly what was the stimulus for how he answered, but I will always remember what he answered. And he said, if I had known all this before, I never would have had to kill my brother. And I knew this was really powerful stuff. And the power of sharing it with other people.
I don't find it anywhere else. This thing about the semanticists know something about abstracting, and they've got a piece of it from what I've been able to read. And what I read from Genlin is, and get from his understanding of the relationship between thinking and experiencing, is I get there how thinking is not the same as experiencing, contributes to experiencing, but you can also get lost in thinking. And that experiencing is primary, and is much more vast than thinking can ever give you. Thinking is always subservient to experiencing. Excuse me. What I get from Marshall that is unique, that I just don't find that anywhere else, is this idea that it's a combination of beware of labels because of what they do. And here, if you have a label, do this instead. And that'll take you away from the label. And that I don't get anywhere else. I haven't found that. That isn't true in Gordon. Gordon doesn't have that same thing. He has a way to go inside, but he doesn't have this transformative thing of beware of labels. And if you find yourself in a label and they're ubiquitous, do this instead. And that will take you to this deeper level of experiencing from which to connect with people.
So for me, what changes over time is just, the different movements. So we've got the Black Lives Matter, we've got, power and privilege. So we have all these things that come into our lives that maybe become more illuminated, that were always there. But to me, NVC is enough to deal with that. So I can take everything back to kind of this, for me, this kernel of truth, of really about presence with what is, with each person. Like, how are you? How can I make life more wonderful for you? And how can you do that for me? So how do we live in that level of presence and authenticity with each other? How do I share my truth with an open heart? To me, that doesn't change. That doesn't change. Maybe the things around it changes as far as what we're dealing with, or maybe it becomes more transparent or obvious. But I think NVC is enough to handle whatever comes up in life.
I want to live compassionately at each and every opportunity. I want to give away the love that's mine to give. I want to live compassionately.